What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a normal interview, only to be blindsided by a host who seems more interested in creating drama than having a conversation? In just 33 seconds, a single dismissive comment would transform a friendly chat into one of the most uncomfortable moments in British television history, exposing the kind of arrogance that turns audiences against the very people meant to entertain them. Liam Neeson arrived at the Loose Women studio that afternoon with the kind of quiet confidence you'd expect from someone who's spent decades mastering his craft. He wasn't there to promote anything specific, just a casual appearance that his team thought would be good for connecting with the daytime audience. The panel that day consisted of Denise Welch, who was leading the interview, along with Nadia Sawalha, Kay Adams, and Janet Street Porter. The atmosphere started off light enough with the usual pleasantries and small talk about his recent projects and life in general, but something felt off from the very beginning. While the other panelists seemed genuinely interested in what Liam had to say, asking thoughtful questions about his approach to acting and his experiences in the industry, Denise kept interrupting with comments that felt more like jabs than jokes. At first, Liam laughed them off, being the professional that he is. He's done thousands of interviews over the years, so he knows how to handle hosts who like to push boundaries for entertainment value. The first real sign of trouble came about 5 minutes into the interview. Liam was in the middle of talking about a charity he'd been working with, something clearly close to his heart, when Denise cut him off mid-sentence. "Oh, that's lovely and all," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "But let's talk about something people actually want to hear about. What about your love life? You're single now, aren't you?" The other panelists looked uncomfortable. Nadia tried to steer the conversation back, saying something like, "Actually, I think the charity work is really interesting." But Denise wasn't having it. She kept pushing, asking increasingly personal questions that had nothing to do with why Liam was supposed to be there. You could see the shift in his body language. He sat up a little straighter, his jaw tightened just slightly, but he still maintained his composure. "I'd rather not discuss my personal life," Liam said calmly, his voice measured and polite. "I came here to talk about my work." This is where most hosts would back off, read the room, and move on to something else. But not Denise. Instead, she leaned forward with this smirk on her face and said, "Oh, come on. Don't be so boring. This is Loose Women, not some stuffy American chat show. We like to have fun here." The word boring hung in the air like a slap. Kay Adams shifted in her seat, looking like she wanted to say something, but couldn't quite find the words. Janet Street Porter, never one to shy away from speaking her mind, actually opened her mouth to interject, but Denise kept going. "You actors are all the same," Denise continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "You come on these shows, you want the publicity, but you don't actually want to give us anything real. What's the point of even being here if you're just going to give us rehearsed answers?" Liam's expression changed then. Not angry, exactly, but something harder. Something that suggested his patience was running very thin. "With respect," he said, his Irish accent becoming more pronounced, as it always does when he's trying to stay calm. "I've been nothing but genuine with you. I've answered every reasonable question you've asked. What I won't do is turn my private life into entertainment for people I don't know." You could feel the tension in the studio. The audience had gone quiet. Even the camera. Operators seemed to sense that something was about to happen. Nadia jumped in, trying to be a peacemaker. "Liam, tell us about working with your recent director," she said warmly. "That must have been an amazing experience." For a moment, it looked like the situation might be saved. Liam turned to Nadia with a grateful expression and started to answer her question. He talked about the creative process, about how he prepares for roles, about the collaboration between actors and directors. It was the kind of insightful, interesting content that makes for good television. The other panelists were engaged, asking follow-up questions, and the conversation was flowing naturally. But Denise couldn't let it go. She sat there with her arms crossed, visibly annoyed that she'd lost control of the interview. And then, just as Liam was making a particularly thoughtful point about the craft of acting, she interrupted again. God, you really do love the sound of your own voice, don't you? Denise said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. The studio went dead silent. This wasn't playful banter anymore. This was just mean. Janet Street Porter actually said Denise in a warning tone, but the damage was done. Liam stopped talking mid-sentence and just stared at her. Not with anger, but with something worse. Disappointment. The kind of look you give someone when they've revealed exactly who they are, and it's not pretty. I'm sorry, Liam said quietly, but his voice carried across the entire studio. Did you just insult me for answering the questions your colleague asked me? Denise tried to backtrack, but she did it in the worst possible way. Oh, don't be so sensitive, she said, still smiling that artificial smile. We're just having a laugh. You can take a joke, can't you? A joke is funny, Liam replied, his voice steady but firm. What you're doing isn't a joke. It's rude. The audience actually gasped. You could hear it ripple through the studio. Kay Adams looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Nadia had her hand over her mouth. Janet Street Porter was nodding slightly, like she agreed with him but couldn't say so out loud. Denise's face flushed red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, it was hard to tell. Excuse me, she said, her voice rising. I don't think you understand how this show works. We're allowed to challenge our guests. We're not just going to sit here and lob softball questions at you. There's a difference between challenging someone and being disrespectful, Liam said. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't losing his temper. He was just stating facts, which somehow made it even more powerful. I've been interviewed by some of the toughest journalists in the world, people who ask hard questions about difficult subjects. I respect that. What I don't respect is being mocked for trying to have a genuine conversation. You could see Denise scrambling now, trying to regain control of a situation that was rapidly spiraling away from her. Well, if you can't handle a little bit of British humor, she started to say, but Liam cut her off. Don't hide behind humor, he said, and there was steel in his voice now. And don't pretend this is about nationality. Rudeness is rudeness, no matter what accent it comes in. The other panelists were frozen. This wasn't how these interviews were supposed to go. Loose Women prided itself on being a place where women could speak freely and challenge their guests. But this had crossed a line, and everyone in that studio knew it. Everyone except Denise, apparently. She leaned back in her chair with this incredulous expression on her face. I cannot believe you're being this precious, she said, and that word, precious, came out like an insult. We have Hollywood stars on here all the time, and they can take a bit of teasing. Teasing, Liam repeated, and for the first time, there was real anger in his voice. Not loud. Anger, but the quiet kind that's somehow more intimidating. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels more like you're trying to belittle me for not playing along with whatever game you've decided we're playing. Nadia tried one more time to salvage the situation. Look, maybe we all just got off on the wrong foot, she said, her voice pleading. Liam, we really are happy to have you here. Why don't we start fresh? It was a kind gesture, and Liam acknowledged it with a small nod in her direction. But his eyes went right back to Denise. I appreciate that, Nadia. I really do, he said. You and Kay and Janet have been nothing but professional and pleasant. But I don't think starting fresh is going to change anything here. He gestured toward Denise without looking away from her. You've made it very clear what you think of me and why I'm here. You've interrupted me, insulted me, dismissed things I care about, and then tried to pass it all off as humor when you got called out on it. That's not someone looking for an interesting conversation. That's someone looking to score points. Denise's mask finally cracked. The fake friendliness disappeared, and what was underneath wasn't pretty. Oh, please, she snapped. You think you're so special because you're in movies. This is my show, my panel. And if you can't handle the way we do things here, maybe you shouldn't have agreed to come on. The possessiveness in those words, my show, revealed everything. This wasn't about the interview anymore. This was about ego and control and someone who couldn't handle not being the center of attention. Janet Street Porter finally spoke up. Denise, that's enough, she said firmly. But Denise wasn't listening to anyone now. No, I'm serious, Denise continued, her voice getting louder. I'm tired of guests coming on here and thinking they can dictate how the interview goes. This isn't Hollywood. We don't bow down to celebrities here. We treat everyone the same. Treating someone the same doesn't mean treating them poorly, Liam said, and he stood up. Just like that. He unclipped his microphone and set it carefully on the chair. If this is how you treat everyone, then I genuinely feel sorry for every person who sat in this chair. The studio erupted. The audience was murmuring. The other panelists were trying to talk at once, and Denise was still in her chair, seemingly unable to process that this was actually happening. Kay Adams stood up too, reaching out toward Liam. Please don't go, she said. We can work this out. But Liam shook his head, and when he spoke, his voice was sad more than angry. I don't think we can, he said. And honestly, I don't think we should. Nobody should have to work this out. Nobody should have to sit somewhere they're not respected. He turned to the audience before he left. I'm sorry you didn't get the interview you came to see, he said, to them directly. You all seem lovely, and you deserved better than this. Then he looked at Nadia, Kay, and Janet. Thank you for your kindness. I hope you continue to use your platform in a positive way. The omission was deliberate and devastating. He'd thanked everyone except Denise. The message was clear without him having to say another word about her. He walked toward the exit, and the cameras followed him, even as the producers were probably screaming in the control booth. Denise finally seemed to realize what was happening. She jumped up from her seat. Fine, walk off, she called after him, trying to sound dismissive, but mostly sounding desperate. Just proves my point that you can't handle real conversation. Liam stopped. Just for a second. He turned back, and the look he gave her was one of pure pity. If you think this was real conversation, he said quietly, then I understand why you're confused about what just happened here. And then he was gone. Just walked right off the set while the cameras were still rolling, while the audience sat in shocked silence, while the other panelists looked at each other with expressions that clearly said they knew exactly who was at fault here, and it wasn't the guest. Denise stood there, trying to maintain her composure, trying to look like she was in control of the situation. But everyone watching could see the truth. She'd pushed and pushed and pushed until a man known for his professionalism and grace decided he'd had enough. She'd mistaken kindness for weakness and found out too late that they're not the same thing. Nadia was the first to speak into the awkward silence. Well, she said, her voice shaky, that was unfortunate. It was such a diplomatic way to put it, such a carefully neutral statement, but the strain in her voice gave away how she really felt. Janet Street Porter wasn't quite so diplomatic. That should never have happened, she said, looking directly at Denise. That was completely out of order. Denise tried to defend herself to her own colleagues, to the audience, to the cameras. He was being oversensitive, she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction now. We've had plenty of guests who can handle our style. Our style isn't bullying, Kay Adams said quietly, and those words seemed to hang in the air like an accusation. The producers cut to commercial break shortly after that, probably grateful for any excuse to stop filming the carnage. But the damage was done. In less than 20 minutes, what should have been a straightforward celebrity interview had turned into a masterclass in how not to treat your guests. And the worst part, the part that made it all so much more devastating, was that Liam had tried to be gracious. He'd tried to redirect, to be professional, to give Denise multiple chances to change course. Every step of the way, he'd been the one trying to make it work. He'd answered questions thoughtfully. He'd attempted to laugh off the early jabs. He'd explicitly stated his boundaries in the politest way possible. He'd even complimented the work he was there to discuss. There was nothing he could have done differently that wouldn't have involved just accepting disrespect as the price of appearing on the show. And that's what made his exit so powerful. It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a diva moment. It was a calm, measured decision by someone who knew his worth and refused to compromise it for a television appearance. He didn't storm off in a rage. He didn't throw anything or yell or cause a scene. He simply stood up, removed his microphone, thanked the people who deserved thanks, and left. The contrast between his behavior and Denise's couldn't have been starker. While she'd been interrupting, insulting, and trying to provoke reactions, he'd been patient and professional. While she'd been hiding behind claims of humor and British culture and show format, he'd been honest about exactly what was happening. While she'd been making it about herself and her ego and her control, he'd been trying to have a genuine conversation. That's what the audience saw. That's what the other panelists saw. That's what everyone watching at home saw. They saw a respected actor being treated disrespectfully by someone who seemed to think her position as host gave her license to behave however she wanted. They saw that actor try repeatedly to steer things in a better direction. And they saw him finally decide that his dignity was more important than staying somewhere he wasn't valued. The other panelists knew it too. You could see it in how Janet had tried to warn Denise off. You could see it in how Nadia had attempted to redirect the conversation multiple times. You could see it in how Kay had used the word bullying without hesitation. They'd all been there. They'd all seen exactly what happened, and they couldn't pretend otherwise, even if they'd wanted to. But Denise, even in the face of all that, even with her colleagues essentially telling her she'd been wrong, even after watching a guest choose to leave rather than continue the interview, still couldn't seem to grasp what she'd done. She kept trying to justify it, kept insisting that Liam was being too sensitive, kept acting like she was the victim of the situation she'd created. That's what happens when someone confuses being provocative with being entertaining. Denise seemed to think that pushing boundaries and making guests uncomfortable was the same thing as good television. She didn't understand that there's a difference between asking tough questions and being tough to deal with. She didn't grasp that challenging someone's ideas isn't the same as challenging their right to basic respect. Good interviewers know how to push their guests without pushing them away. They know how to ask difficult questions in a way that invites honest answers rather than defensive reactions. They know that the goal is to reveal something interesting about the person sitting across from them, not to reveal their own need to dominate the conversation. Denise demonstrated none of that understanding. Instead, she treated the interview like a competition she needed to win. Every time Liam tried to give a thoughtful answer, she saw it as him taking up too much space. Every time he set a boundary, she saw it as him being difficult. Every time he remained calm in the face of her provocations, she escalated instead of reconsidering her approach. It was ego-driven hosting at its worst. And the truly sad part was that it didn't have to be this way. Liam Neeson is known for giving great interviews when treated with respect. He's thoughtful, articulate, and has decades of fascinating experiences to draw from. He's worked with incredible directors, been part of iconic films, overcome personal tragedy with grace, and used his platform for charitable work. There was so much potential for an engaging, meaningful conversation, but none of that mattered to someone more interested in creating conflict than connection. Denise had a chance to have a real dialogue with someone who's lived an extraordinary life, and she threw it away because she couldn't stop trying to score points off him. She prioritized her own entertainment over everyone else's, including the audience who'd come to see a proper interview. The audience's reaction throughout the whole incident spoke volumes. They'd been enthusiastic at first, happy to see a beloved actor on their favorite show. But as things deteriorated, their energy changed. The laughter became nervous. The applause became scattered. The silence became heavy. By the time Liam walked off, they weren't just quiet because they were shocked. They were quiet because they were uncomfortable watching someone be treated that way. That discomfort was the real story. Not the dramatic exit itself, but everything that led to it. The slow build of disrespect. The repeated boundary violations. The dismissive comments disguised as jokes. The way one person's need to dominate turned what should have been enjoyable into something painful to watch. That's what made the moment so significant. When Liam said, "Nobody should have to sit somewhere they're not respected," he wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for every person who's ever been in a situation where someone with power or authority made them feel small. Every employee who's dealt with a dismissive boss. Every person who's been mocked for being genuine. Every individual who's been told they're too sensitive for objecting to mistreatment. His exit was a reminder that you always have the choice to leave. That no opportunity, no matter how prestigious or public, is worth sacrificing your self-respect. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in your own diminishment. And he did it without burning bridges with the people who hadn't done anything wrong, without generalizing about the show or the network or British television, without making it about anything other than the specific behavior that had occurred. That precision, that careful distinction between the person who'd wronged him and everyone else involved, showed remarkable character. He could have stormed off insulting everyone and everything associated with the show. He could have made sweeping statements about daytime television or talk show hosts or the media in general. But he didn't. He specifically thanked the people who'd been kind to him. He specifically apologized to the audience. He specifically avoided painting everyone with the same brush. Even in his exit, even in his frustration and disappointment, he maintained his integrity. He didn't become the thing he was objecting to. He didn't respond to disrespect with disrespect. He simply removed himself from a situation that had become untenable, and he did it in a way that made it absolutely clear why he was leaving and who was responsible for creating those circumstances. The other panelists' reactions after he left confirmed what everyone already knew. When Janet said that should never have happened, she wasn't talking about the exit. She was talking about the behavior that prompted it. When Kay used the word bullying, she was naming exactly what they'd all witnessed. When Nadia called it unfortunate, she was using British understatement to describe something that was actually far worse than unfortunate. They all knew. They'd been sitting right there. They'd tried to intervene. They'd attempted to redirect. They'd done what they could within the constraints of their positions and the dynamics of the panel. But ultimately, they couldn't control what their colleague chose to do, and they couldn't force a guest to stay somewhere he was being mistreated. All they could do was bear witness and, in their own careful ways, acknowledge the truth of what had transpired. The fact that it all happened on live television, in front of an audience and cameras, made it impossible to rewrite or reframe later. There was no editing this into a different story, no way to spin it as a misunderstanding or a personality clash. Everyone saw exactly what happened. Everyone heard the words that were said. Everyone watched the escalation from mild discomfort to complete breakdown. The truth was there on tape for anyone to see. That transparency, that unavoidable documentation of events, meant that Denise couldn't hide behind later explanations or justifications. She couldn't claim things were taken out of context when the full context was available for everyone to judge. She couldn't say she was misquoted when her exact words were recorded. She couldn't pretend it wasn't as bad as people remembered when they could go back and watch it happen again. And what they would see, if they watched it back, was a pattern. Not just one comment that landed wrong, but a sustained campaign of dismissiveness. Not just one interruption, but multiple attempts to derail and control. Not just one joke that missed, but repeated efforts to belittle and diminish. The pattern was the problem, and the pattern was undeniable. That's what made Liam's patience so notable in retrospect. He'd given her so many chances. He'd tried to laugh it off. He'd tried to redirect. He'd tried to set boundaries politely. He'd tried to engage with the other panelists instead. He'd tried to focus on the substance rather than the tone. He'd tried everything a reasonable person would try before finally accepting that this wasn't going to get better, and he needed to leave. His decision to walk away wasn't impulsive. It was the result of trying everything else first. It was the conclusion he reached after exhausting all other options. It was the choice he made when it became clear that staying would mean accepting treatment he found unacceptable. That's not sensitivity, or being precious, or being unable to handle British humor. That's having standards and enforcing them. Those standards, that willingness to walk away from something that wasn't serving him, that refusal to accept disrespect as the cost of appearing on television, all of it spoke to a larger truth about how we allow ourselves to be treated. Liam demonstrated that having a career, having a public profile, having opportunities doesn't mean you have to accept everything that comes with them. You can still say no. You can still have boundaries. You can still insist on basic human decency, even when someone thinks their platform gives them permission to ignore it. That lesson, more than any specific detail of what was said or how it was said, was what made the moment matter. Not because a famous person left a talk show, but because a human being chose dignity over opportunity. Not because an interview went wrong, but because someone decided that how he was treated mattered more than the exposure, the appearance, might give him. Not because of the drama itself, but because of what the drama revealed about respect, power, and the choice to walk away. In those 33 seconds when Denise said, "God, you really do love the sound of your own voice, don't you?" She didn't just insult a guest. She revealed who she was and what she valued. She showed that she cared more about maintaining control than fostering connection. She demonstrated that she viewed the interview as something to win rather than something to share. She exposed the entitlement that made her believe she could treat someone that way without consequences. And Liam, in choosing to leave, showed what consequences look like when someone refuses to pretend everything is fine. Not dramatic consequences, not vengeful consequences, just the simple consequence of absence. The consequence of saying, if this is the environment you're creating, I'm not going to be part of it. The consequence of valuing himself enough to remove himself from a situation that didn't value him. That's the real story. Not the spectacle of the exit, but the principle behind it. Not the entertainment value of the confrontation, but the human value of the boundaries being enforced. Not what made for good television, but what made for good character. And in the end, everyone watching understood exactly what they'd seen. They'd seen someone be pushed until they wouldn't be pushed anymore. They'd seen someone choose themselves. They'd seen someone walk away. And they'd seen that sometimes walking away is exactly the right thing to do.